it's getting messy, Dave Isaac, as he joins us now to talk a little bit more. He was there last night. I thought Hakstol kind of just took it as it's not that big of a deal. Hey, maybe he's looking at we won 10 games in a row last year, didn't make the playoffs. Maybe we should lose 10 and try it the other way.
Well, the last time they did lose 10 was 9 years ago, and they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. So obviously this is all part of the plan. Everything's fine. It's just like that meme that you see all over the internet with the dog sipping the coffee, the room's on fire. It's getting to be that point.
How loud was it? I mean, on television, you could kind of hear it. I mean, it was audible what they were saying, but was it noticeable if you were a Flyer executive and or the coach standing behind the on the bench last night?
I'm sure Ron Hakstol heard it. It wasn't very loud, in part because there were very few people there. The first time that chant started up, as far as I can tell, it was pretty much right underneath Ron Hakstol. I don't know if they even knew that, the fans that were there. But that's where the first one was. The second one, it sounded like it was coming from the lower bowl, but when you're down there, I think you're hearing the sounds of the game. I don't know if Dave Hakstol physically heard that, and that specifically wasn't asked to him whether he heard it. He did offer a reaction to it that was, kind of this is what I signed up for kind of deal. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure if he actually heard it. But Ron Hakstol, I'm sure he heard it.
What about the players? After the game, they were asked specifically Claude Giroux about, hey, you heard those chants about your coach. What do you think? What was his reaction to hearing that about the head coach?
Yeah, he kind of rolled his eyes and said they can chant whatever they want. A lot of these guys, you know what? When you get to this point, you can kind of tell if a team really has quit on a coach or if they haven't. I don't think these guys have, at least not yet. Some of just by the way that they were saying it, I mean, they pretty much have to say the same thing, right? It's on us, it's on the players. We're the ones going out there, and that's what a lot of those guys said last night. But you can tell kind of how genuine they are or aren't, and I got the sense that they really believe that. But I also think that part of that might have been the length of this streak, the fact that it's 9 games. That's more than a tenth of their season that they've lost consecutively. I think they do just want to take accountability for that, even though, there's not a whole lot they can do about these past 9 games. They have to go out and win one on Saturday. And if yesterday was any indication, they're kind of far away from doing that.
Yeah, they were about as flat as you could be in that third period last night. What, they have one shot in a stretch there, and the coach said the same thing. Hey, we got to forget about it and move on to Saturday against Boston. But you wrote about it that firing Hakstol wouldn't solve all of the Flyers' problems, that they have other issues. But this is going on 3 years now that this team has looked very similar.
Yeah, I mean, this is also the first year that they've had several young guys. I mean, last year they had 2. This year they had another handful. I'm not standing up here and defending the coach necessarily, but I think that there are some things that you don't gain by just firing the coach. This is a core group that's been together for several years now, and 3 of them are on a top line that's producing really well for the Flyers. But if Jake Voracek continues to have a point a game, but also turn the pucks over every time he crosses the opposing blue line, what is it really doing?
Dave Isaac's with us here, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Flyers lose again last night. Players-only meeting. We don't know what was said behind those closed doors, but do you think there's some things that can be shook up with this team?
Yeah, I think that Ron Hakstol needs to do something. I just don't think that a coaching change is first.
But Dave, he's trying to do something to better the team every single day.
Right. Well, accepting phone calls or declining phone calls on his cell phone isn't really tangible. He made a minor move in calling out Moran, and he played 1 game, 2 games, and Danik Martel was leading the American League in goals. But you can only do so much. I mean, as much as I just said about the coaches and everything, he had Martel up here for 3 games. He played him 5 minutes last night. If you have him and you're still not going to play him, then there's not a whole lot more that Hakstol could have done to put Martel in there, unless he was down on the bench himself. So I think a trade is usually what comes next, and it's different trades happen for different reasons. And when you're a team like this, you kind of lose the upper hand because the opposing general manager knows that you're trying to do something here to shake it up. And maybe there have been offers out there that we just don't know about, and it wasn't really for full value. So Hakstol said, you know what, I don't want to make a change bad enough that I'm just going to make a poor trade.
There's been a lot of talk about breaking up that top line, which is third best in the league, to the point that they brought it up on both the radio broadcast and the television broadcast last night. And, they're, all employees of the team, that they're starting to suggest now that, hey, you got these three guys, two of your best centermen are playing on the same line. Do you think it's time to break up that top line?
Yeah, usually when you do that, it's because you're trying to get those guys individually going. In this case, it would be to get everybody else going. And each of the last two games now for like two shifts, and it was almost tough to tell because it was so small of a sample size, if it was just because they were coming off of a penalty kill that he was doing this, or if he was actually trying it. 2 games ago, he said that he was making a legitimate effort there. Last night, didn't even quite get to that with everything that had happened in the length of the streak and everything. But you need to do a little bit better than that. You can't breaking them up and then go back to them because you're hoping to get back in the game and score 2 goals. I think that it's at the point now where, you kind of do have to break these guys up. It would be interesting to see what those combinations would be, especially with Claude Giroux, because I think one of the main reasons why he worked as a winger was because Sean Courier was playing so well as a center. If you move Giroux back to center, now you've really discombobulated things. But it'll be interesting to see what the Flyers do tomorrow in practice as they work towards that game Saturday against Boston.
Dave, you wrote about Ron Hextall thinks that this is still a playoff team, and you're searching for questions. How could this be a playoff team? Typically in the NHL around Thanksgiving, where you are in the standings, kind of is where you're going to be cemented for most of the year. They are 7 points out of a playoff spot right now?
Yeah, they're 6 out at the moment, and I wrote about that stat around Thanksgiving, too, and thought that it looked really good, except for the last 2 times the Flyers made the playoffs in Thanksgiving. So that kind of, takes away from the point a little bit. But without a doubt, this is a team that has to get going, and even more so than just a losing streak, they're in the best division in hockey. So the longer you kind of dilly-dally here, other teams are going to not just leapfrog you. I mean, the Flyers are already in the basement, but they'll just put you in their dust. So I think that is more so the reason why the Flyers really need to pick things up here. And the good news for them is that the second half of their season is going to have a lot of those division games. I think they've only had 3 of them so far in the first 25 games. So if they can find their game by January, February, maybe they can make up some of those points then. But they'll be toast if they keep waiting that long.
Yeah, and now how much of this, we talked about splitting up that first line, Dave. How much of this that Simmons has been kind of banged up and, some of that, how much is just getting him healthy going to jumpstart things?
Yeah, but it's tough to get him healthy if they keep playing him. And you know what? Simmons, you almost expect it from the player, right? He's going to say, oh, yeah, I'm 100%, even though you can tell that he's not. And he keeps saying, I'm 100%, I'm 100%. And last week he said, well, you know what? I've been feeling a lot better the last 10 games or 10 days or whatever the case may be. The general manager says he's 100%. So if they're all going to fib it and tell you that he's healthy when you can tell that he's not skating right, then they're A, insulting your intelligence, and B, you're using Wayne Simmons at 70%. And then by the time you get to those games that matter, maybe he's 50%, maybe he's 40%. They should have sat him down earlier in the season when it was clear that there was a little injury or two that was ailing him, and wait for him to get better. If you remember, I mean, I know it's apples and oranges, but in 2012 when the Flyers had Jaromir Jagr, he left the Winter Classic like 3 separate times, and all that year he was dealing with a groin injury, and I think that's part of what's ailing Wayne Simmons. And by the time they got to the playoffs, he was basically useless. So the Flyers really have to assess the risk-reward there, and whether they think that that playing him when he's not 100% is really the best move.
All right. Hey, we're not talking about the goalie, right?
Brian Elliott's playing well, and you know what? Earlier in the season, I was really hard on him. I didn't think he still had much left in the tank. Michael Neuvirth's been terrible, especially recently, but Brian Elliott is the only thing working for the Flyers recently, aside from that top line.
Real quick, do you think maybe it's not the right decision in your opinion, but do you think that Hakstol would consider moving on from the coach in season?
I don't think in season, maybe at the end of this season, because he stuck his neck out so much to get this guy who had no NHL experience, and basically if it went well, it would make both of them look really smart. It would be a really big indictment of himself if he were to cut ties with Dave Hakstol in the middle of his third season. And, you talked about how maybe little urgency Hakstol appeared to have last night, or the fact that he was at least calm. Maybe lack of urgency wasn't the best phrase, but I don't think it's at the point where he's going to cut this guy mid-season. But if they don't make the playoffs again, and if they miss out on a fashion similar to these last 9 games, then I think there's a much stronger case for that happening.
All right, Dave Isaac at Dave G. Isaac on Twitter. Follow him there. The Flyers off till Saturday. You can listen to that game 1 o'clock against the Bruins right here on 97.3 ESPN. And we'll see if they can clean things up as the Flyers lose again, this time to the Sharks 3-1. Thanks, Dave.
All right, thanks for having me.